Hey everyone, welcome to the show.
Great to be diving in again.
Can you imagine the sheer terror? I mean, holding a crown meant for you when powerful enemies are just circling, ready to snatch it away.
It's quite a picture, isn't it?
That's the razor's edge we're exploring today, a forgotten but utterly gripping chapter of English history.
What's fascinating when you really think about it is how close England actually came to a completely different trajectory.
Mm.
This isn't just, dusty dates and names.
No, not at all.
It's a really visceral story of survival against, well, pretty overwhelming odds.
Absolutely. Today, in this historical deep dive, we're plunging into the early years of King Henry III's reign, a period just brimming with high stakes, unexpected heroes, and the surprising tenacity of a royal line basically teetering on the brink.
That's a good way to put it, teetering.
We'll be using Matthew Lewis's book, Henry III, and hey, you'll find a link on Amazon in the description if you want to delve even further as our guide.
That's a great resource.
Yeah, to understand why this king and this crucial period has been so often overlooked, don't forget to like and subscribe while you're listening.
And for us, really the core question in this deep dive is this. How did a 9-year-old boy inheriting a kingdom pretty much in chaos manage to hold on to his throne?
Right. How did he?
We're going to unpack the key personalities, the pivotal decisions, and just the sheer will that prevented England from, well, becoming part of France.
Okay, let's unpack this then. The story doesn't actually begin with Henry III himself, does it? We need to wind the clock back a bit.
That's right. Yeah, you have to look at his grandfather, King Henry II, who died way back in 1189.
Talk about a family in turmoil.
Oh, absolutely. Henry II's final years were just plagued by rebellions from his own sons, Richard and John, most famously. And the vast Angevin Empire, that huge collection of lands in France and England, was really starting to crumble.
So the foundations were shaky from the start.
Very unstable. Yeah, this internal conflict laid a very unstable foundation for everything that followed.
Right. Fast forward a couple of decades, and under King John, things have gone from bad to, well, truly dire.
Dire is the word.
We all remember Magna Carta and the grumbling from the barons, but it escalated way beyond that, didn't it? To the point where they were actually plotting to kill the king outright.
Yeah. What's truly striking, I think, is the level of desperation among the English barons by then.
Desperation is right.
By 1212, a significant number of them were so utterly fed up with John's rule, completely finished, that they were willing to invite Prince Louis of France to become their king.
Wow. Inviting the French prince?
Can you imagine? This wasn't just some minor disagreement. It was a fundamental challenge to the entire English monarchy.
How did Louis even have a claim?
Well, it was tenuous, but it came through his wife, Blanche of Castile. She was actually John's niece.
Okay, so there was some connection.
Enough, in their eyes anyway, to give his ambition a sort of semblance of legitimacy.
And then in 1216, John's reign just ends. Rather unceremoniously.
Yeah, lost his baggage train in the wash, succumbs to dysentery. Not exactly a heroic exit.
Not really. But even his final concerns, the things in his will, they're quite telling, aren't they?
Absolutely. John's will, and it's amazing, it still survives in its original form, the oldest one we have from an English king.
Really? The actual document?
The actual parchment. It's quite small physically. Yeah. It gives this fascinating, intimate look at his priorities as he faced death.
So what was top of his list?
Despite everything, his overwhelming concern was securing the inheritance for his young son, Henry, who was only 9.
Just 9 years old. Wow.
Yeah. His other requests were more, standard for the time, reparations to the church, aid for crusades in the Holy Land, rewards for loyal servants, alms for the poor.
Covering all the bases before the end.
Exactly. Reflects the traditional obligations and anxieties, maybe, of a medieval ruler facing judgment.
And who does he entrust with this massive task, protecting his kid's claim?
He names 13 executors, an incredible group of powerful individuals.
13? Who is in that group?
Looking at the list, it's like a snapshot of the entire English political elite. You've got the papal legate, Guala.
The Pope's representative.
Yes, hugely influential. Then several powerful bishops like Peter de Roche.
Okay.
And formidable lay leaders like the famous William Marshal, Earl of Pembroke, and Ranulph, the Earl of Chester.
William Marshal. Now there's a name.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And others too, William Ferrers, William Brewer, Walter de Lacy, Fawkes de Brotte. It's a powerhouse list.
So basically everyone who mattered.
Precisely. This group represented a huge concentration of both spiritual and, crucially, political and military authority. Their actions, their loyalty, or maybe their betrayal,
Yeah, that was possible too.
would directly determine Henry's fate. John knew the future rested squarely on their shoulders.
So this brings us to the boy king himself, Henry of Winchester. Just 10 days after his father's death, he's hastily crowned in Gloucester.
Hasty is the word. October 28th, 1216.
Not exactly the grand Westminster Abbey ceremony we picture.
No, the circumstances really underscore the urgency, the instability. Gloucester was chosen because London was enemy territory. Prince Louis and his barons held it.
Right, Louis was in London.
And they didn't even have proper coronation gear. They had to borrow robes, use a simple circlet or coronet instead of a crown. It shows the chaos.
Wow. Borrowed robes for a king's coronation.
But crucially, the papal legate Guala was there, alongside Peter de Roche. Guala's presence provided that vital stamp of legitimacy from the church.
That papal approval must have been huge.
Absolutely essential.
And then comes this critical moment. Who steps up to actually lead the royalist cause? William Marshal seems the obvious choice, right?
He does. But there's this rather surprising moment where he initially offers the role to Ranulph, the Earl of Chester.
Really? Why would he do that?
Well, it reveals the character of both men, doesn't it? Marshal, despite being, what, 70 years old by then?
70, wow.
Yeah, advanced age, immense challenge. But he was clearly the most capable leader. Renowned valor, experience, wisdom.
Everyone knew him.
Exactly. And Ranulph's reaction is fascinating, too. He insists Marshal take the lead.
So Ranulph turned it down.
He argued compellingly that Marshal's abilities and popularity were what they needed. It shows remarkable selflessness, actually, and shrewd political judgment from Ranulph.
Recognizing the best man for the job, even if it wasn't him.
Both men understood what was needed to unite their cause in that desperate hour.
So Marshal becomes the guardian of the king and the realm, not regent.
A deliberately chosen title, yeah. Reflecting the extraordinary circumstances of child king, kingdom in flames.
And he immediately brings in Peter de Roche, who'd been Henry's tutor.
Right, Marshal nominated him, likely for continuity. Peter de Roche already had a relationship with young Henry.
It makes sense. Provide some stability for the boy.
Exactly, amidst all the chaos. Now, the public reaction to Marshal's appointment was largely positive. People respected him.
Understandably.
But contemporary accounts suggest Marshal himself had private anxieties. He knew the pressure was enormous, acutely aware of the young king's vulnerability, the lack of resources, and his own advancing years.
It was a huge burden for a 70-year-old.
Immense.
And Guala, the papal legate, you mentioned his importance. He really throws the church's weight behind Henry, doesn't he?
Absolutely. He excommunicates Prince Louis and all his allies.
Excommunication, serious stuff.
Very serious.
Where?
And he essentially frames the entire royalist effort as a holy crusade.
Wow. Talk about a powerful PR strategy.
It was pivotal, invoking papal authority, casting it as a holy war.
Right.
It provided this potent ideological justification for supporting Henry.
More than just feudal loyalty.
Exactly. It offered spiritual rewards, potentially swaying undecided barons, and definitely boosting morale for the royalists.
Okay, so let's picture the situation on the ground. After John's death, England's a mess, right? A patchwork of control.
Very much so. Incredibly precarious for the royalists. Louis was besieging Dover Castle.
Which was holding out.
Yes, crucially. But he held London, much of the southeast, even parts of Yorkshire. Royalist strongholds were scattered, isolated across the country.
Sounds like a recipe for a long, drawn-out stalemate.
It could easily have been. Louis's control over key areas, plus his baronial support, was formidable. But those scattered strongholds, and especially the resistance at Dover under Hubert de Burgh.
Ah, Hubert de Burgh. He's key here.
Absolutely. His defiance at Dover was critical. It prevented a complete, immediate collapse of the royalist cause.
Tell me more about that. He refused Louis's offer.
Repeatedly. Even when his garrison was facing starvation, he wouldn't surrender.
That kind of defiance, that must have been a huge morale boost for Henry's side.
Enormous. It tied down a significant chunk of Louis's forces, yes, but more importantly, it was this powerful symbol of resistance. It gave hope.
So Louis can't take Dover. What does he do instead?
He embarks on a campaign to seize other royalist castles. Hertford, Berkhamsted, Orford, Norwich, Cambridge, Colchester.
Trying to consolidate his grip.
Exactly. But William Marshal manages to negotiate truces in several places.
Truces? Was that wise? Seems like giving ground.
It looks like he was playing a very strategic game to delay, buying valuable time.
Ah, okay. What was the goal?
Well, it likely served several purposes. Allowed him to consolidate his own, often scattered, forces, prevented further critical losses, maybe even sowed some doubt within Louis's ranks. Remember, Louis had French and English supporters.
Good point. Keep them guessing.
It was pragmatic, avoid a decisive early defeat while he waited for the right moment to strike back.
And that opportunity arrives at the Battle of Lincoln, May 1217.
The pivotal moment, yes.
Marshal gathers his forces at Newark. They come up with a plan.
A rather ingenious plan, actually. Marshal's leadership, combined with Peter de Roche's strategic thinking, proved decisive.
What was the plan?
They decided to approach Lincoln from the northwest side, which was less heavily defended. They used the old Roman road, the Fosseway.
Catch them by surprise.
Completely. Louis's forces were busy besieging Lincoln Castle, which was being held for Henry by a remarkable woman, Nicola de la Haye, the sheriff.
A woman holding the castle. Fantastic.
Nicola de la Haye, yes. So the French were focused on the siege. Key royalists were there with Marshal Ranulph of Chester, Fawkes de Breauté.
The executor Fawkes.
The very same. Peter de Roche did some reconnaissance first.
Okay, setting the scene.
Then Fawkes's crossbowmen, inside the castle with Nicola, started firing down on the besiegers.
Raining death from above.
Pretty much. Meanwhile, Ranulph launched a diversionary attack on the main north gate, drawing French attention.
Pinning them down.
And then, Marshal himself, despite his age, led a determined assault on that weaker northwest gate.
Leading from the front. It sounds incredibly dramatic.
It was. Imagine the chaos, the surprise among Louis's men. There's an anecdote about a French soldier working a siege engine, looking up in disbelief just before he struck down.
You can almost picture the panic.
Absolute panic. Marshal's personal bravery was apparently inspiring. The tide turned very quickly. The French commander, the Count of Perche, was captured and killed.
A major blow.
Huge. The French forces tried to retreat back through the town, but it was chaos. They got jammed up trying to cross the bridge over the river with him.
Bottlenecked.
Exactly. And apparently, the mechanism of one of the town gates got stuck, supposedly by a cow blocking it.
A cow? You kidding?
That's the story. Whether it's entirely true or not, it paints a picture of total disarray. Many French knights and rebel English barons were captured. Lincoln was a massive victory for the Royalists.
Incredible, but that wasn't quite the end of it, was it? Lincoln secured the land, but there was still the threat from the sea. French reinforcements.
Exactly right. The war wasn't won yet. Louis could still bring troops over from France. Which brings us back to Hubert de Burgh.
The hero of Dover.
The very same. He steps up again for a crucial naval battle off the coast of Sandwich in August 1217.
A naval battle.
Okay. Hubert led the English fleet. They employed a clever tactical feint, pretending to sail past the French, then turning sharply to gain the advantage of the wind.
Smart sailing.
And then they used a rather unconventional weapon.
Oh, what was that?
Powdered quicklime. They threw it into the wind, towards the French ships.
Quicklime. What would that do?
It would blow into the sailors' eyes, blinding them. Pretty brutal, but effective.
Wow. Innovative warfare.
It caused chaos on the French decks. The English boarded the flagship, which belonged to a notorious pirate allied with Louis, called Eustace the Monk.
Eustace the Monk. What a name.
He was captured and apparently executed pretty much on the spot.
Swift justice.
The French fleet was devastated. Only about 15 of their 80 ships made it back home.
80 ships down to 15. A crushing defeat.
Absolutely crushing. It severed Louis's supply lines completely. No hope of significant reinforcements.
So that really sealed it.
Pretty much. All of this culminates in the Treaty of Kingston in September 1217.
Okay, the peace treaty. What were the terms?
Louis finally agrees to withdraw his claim to the English throne. And the terms were surprisingly generous, all things considered.
Generous, after all.
Well, it focused on restoring the situation. Lands and rights returned to how they were before the invasion. Prisoners released on both sides. English subjects had to renounce any allegiance they'd sworn to Louis.
Standard stuff.
Louis had to release any hostages he held, order the surrender of the Channel Islands, which his forces still occupied, and urge his Welsh ally, Llewellyn ap Iorwerth, to stop causing trouble in Wales.
Trying to tie up all the loose ends.
And, interestingly, the English agreed to pay Louis a sum of money.
Pay him to leave.
Essentially, yes, a financial incentive to encourage his departure quickly and prevent any lingering resentment that might fuel future conflict.
Pragmatic. Get him out, draw a line under it.
Exactly. It was a successful resolution to a very dangerous chapter.
So Henry III makes his triumphant return to London in October 1217. What a difference a year makes.
A huge contrast to that hurried coronation in Gloucester.
And one of the first big acts is the reissuance of Magna Carta, right? With some changes.
Yes, under William Marshal's guidance. The Great Charter was reissued, with some amendments and omissions from the original 1215 version.
What kind of changes?
Things like clarifying widows' dower rights, refining clauses on justice, setting limits on how long goods could be requisitioned without payment 40 days, generally.
Okay, practical adjustments.
Yes. Less frequent meetings of fasure courts, reestablishing the tax known as scutage, as it had been under Henry II, trying to find a workable balance.
And wasn't there another charter issued around the same time, something about forests?
Absolutely, the separate charter of the forest. This was hugely significant.
Why so significant?
It specifically addressed grievances about the royal forest, vast areas of land under special harsh royal law. This charter reversed the expansion of the forest under Richard III and John.
So giving land back, effectively.
Restoring rights, more like it. Rights for ordinary people to graze pigs, gather wood, forage, things vital for survival.
Big deal for common folk.
Massive. And crucially, it removed the death penalty for poaching deer, replacing it with fines or imprisonment.
A bit more humane.
Definitely. And that charter of the forest remained English law for centuries. Its impact was incredibly long-lasting.
So Magna Carta and the Charter of the Forest, fundamental building blocks.
Absolutely critical steps in solidifying peace and reestablishing a framework for governance after the war.
And were there other efforts to kind of reset things, establish peace more broadly?
Yes, there were various efforts. Measures were taken to protect Jewish communities who often suffered in times of upheaval.
That sounds positive.
Well, yes and no. It came with the deeply troubling requirement that they wear identifying strips of cloth on their clothing.
Oh, right. So protection, but also segregation.
Precisely. A reflection of the complex and often discriminatory attitudes of the time.
What else was happening?
Another interesting development was that many leading barons decided to go on crusade.
Leave the country. Who went?
People like Ranulph of Chester, Robert Fitzwalter, Sarah de Quincey, major figures, some of whom had been rebels against John.
Why leave then? Genuine piety.
Partly, perhaps. But it was also convenient. It removed potential forces of instability from England, redirected their energies elsewhere. A concerted effort to reset and rebuild, as you said.
Makes sense. Get the big players focused on something else for a while.
Exactly.
Sadly, though, William Marshal's incredible service couldn't last forever. He was getting old.
Indeed. His remarkable contribution was drawing to a close. He died in May 1219.
Did he say anything before the end?
He gave a final speech, apparently, entrusting the guardianship of young Henry and the realm not to one person, but to the collective baronage.
Spreading the responsibility.
Seems so. But almost immediately after his death, you see a bit of a power struggle emerge for the practical day-to-day control, the regency.
Who was involved?
Mainly Peter de Roche, the bishop who had been Henry's tutor,
Right.
and Hubert de Burgh, the justiciar, the hero of Dover and Sandwich.
Ah, the two main figures left standing.
Pretty much. It highlights the underlying political tensions that were still there, even after the French threat was gone.
And Marshal himself. Any last wishes?
He actually became a Knight Templar on his deathbed.
Really? Joined the Templars right at the end.
Yes, reflecting the deep religious convictions common in that era, a powerful symbolic act.
So Marshal's gone. Does the Pope's influence lessen now?
Not really, no. Papal authority remains significant. We see figures like Pandulf, who succeeded Guala as legate, keeping a close eye on things.
Like what?
Particularly the English exchequer, the finances. There was always interest in collecting funds for potential future crusades.
Always got the money in the Crusades.
Often, yes. And Pope Honorius III himself was writing letters to England, emphasizing the critical nest for wise and upright men to instruct and guide the young king.
Rome was definitely still a major power broker.
No question about it. England was still technically a papal fiefdom since John's time.
Right, I forgot about that. But even with all this guidance, Henry himself starts to grow up. He's a teenager now. Does he start showing signs of wanting to rule himself?
He does. Subtle signs at first, but yes. His second coronation in May 1220 is a key moment.
How so?
Unlike the first rushed one, this was held at Westminster Abbey. It was a much more peaceful, splendid affair. It symbolized a return to normality, growing stability.
A proper coronation this time.
Exactly. And you see other signs of stability. Peter de Roche and Fawkes de Breauté both felt secure enough to take the Crusaders' vow, planning to leave the country for a time.
Things must have felt calmer.
Comparatively, yes. Though there were still ongoing tensions, particularly with Llewellyn and Wales, William Marshal had been quite effective in enforcing royal authority there before he died.
So Wales was still a problem area.
Always a potential flashpoint. But the most interesting signs are in the official government documents.
What kind of signs?
You start to see subtle but significant changes in the wording. Instead of document ending, witness Hubert de Burgh, my justiciar.
The guy running things for him.
Right. They start ending, witness myself.
Ah, Henry putting his own name to it.
Exactly. A clear, albeit small, assertion of his own authority. His increasing desire to take direct control.
And then there's that interesting incident in 1224, something about the charters.
Yes, that's quite revealing. Henry publicly reaffirms his commitment to Magna Carta and the Charter of the Forest.
Okay, seems straightforward.
But apparently he did it in the face of some opposition, notably from William Brewer, one of the old guard from his father's time.
So he stood his ground.
He did. It demonstrates a cautious but definite assertion of his own will, and also a recognition of how important those charters had become. He knew he needed to uphold them.
A balancing act, asserting himself but respecting the limits.
Precisely. A pragmatic understanding, even as a young man. Though interestingly, the Pope also intervened around this time regarding how Peter de Roche was being treated, showing the Church still held considerable sway.
Always pulling strings. So he's starting to assert himself. Does he face more direct challenges?
He does. Later in 1224, there's the siege of Bedford Castle.
What happened there?
It was held by Fawkes of Breteuil, the same Fawkes who was one of John's executors and fought at Lincoln.
He rebelled.
His brother was holding it defiantly against royal orders. Henry led the siege himself. It was long and difficult, but he eventually took the castle and dealt quite harshly with the garrison.
Harshly?
Yes. It showed he was willing to use force against those who defied his authority, perhaps learning that past leniency towards rebels hadn't always worked.
Getting tougher.
Seems so. Then internationally, an opportunity potentially arises in 1226.
What's that?
Louis VIII of France, the same Prince Louis who invaded England, dies. His son, Louis IX, is just a boy.
A minority in France, just like Henry had been.
Exactly. Potentially creating opportunities for Henry to try and regain some of those lost Angevin lands on the continent.
Did he take that chance?
He did eventually try, but we'll get to that. First, in April 1228, the Pope formally confirms that Henry is assuming full personal authority in England. He's officially ruling in his own right.
A big milestone. No more guardians.
Right. But that same year, another major figure dies, Archbishop Stephen Langton.
The Archbishop of Canterbury involved with Magna Carta.
The very one. His death leaves a vacuum in the English church. And then in 1229, Henry makes his move regarding France.
The invasion? How did it go?
Not well. He launched an expedition to Normandy, but it was pretty unsuccessful. Logistical problems, lack of support.
Ah, so the opportunity wasn't seized.
No. And Henry apparently blamed Hubert de Burgh for the failure. Signs of friction there.
Blaming his chief minister.
Then a few years later, 1232, another major figure passes Ranulph, Earl of Chester.
The one who deferred to Marshal.
Yes. His death brings William Marshal's son, Richard Marshal, Earl of Pembroke, more into prominence.
The next generation stepping up.
Indeed. And that same year, 1232, Henry does something quite personal. He visits his father John's tomb at Worcester Cathedral.
Paying respects.
More than that. He commissions and installs a new tomb effigy for John. It's actually the oldest royal effigy in England that still survives.
The oldest one. Wow.
Yeah, and the sculptures placed around it are also interesting. There's one of Edward the Confessor, whom Henry greatly admired.
His ideal king.
Right. And some scholars think other sculptures might represent bad kings, perhaps as a contrast or a warning.
So he's thinking about kingship. Good versus bad.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What was Henry contemplating about the nature of kingship, his father's troubled legacy, and his own role standing there by that tomb?
A fascinating glimpse into his mindset.
It suggests a deep, ongoing reflection on what it meant to be king, the responsibilities, the legacies left behind.
So when we look back at it all, the early years of Henry III's reign were just an absolute whirlwind.
Totally chaotic. A child king, civil war, foreign invasion.
The unexpected survival of the Plantagenet dynasty really down to William Marshal more than anyone.
His leadership was incredible, yeah. And then the slow, difficult consolidation of peace after Louis left.
Plus the reissuance of Magna Carta and that really important Charter of the Forest, laying crucial foundations for English law and liberty.
Absolutely fundamental. And even amidst all the chaos and guidance, you see those early, subtle signs of Henry himself beginning to assert his own authority.
Preparing for the long haul.
Exactly. All laying the crucial groundwork for the very long and often turbulent reign that followed. It was a period of immense instability that somehow, against the odds, forged a new path for England.
It really makes you consider, though, how did these formative years, so incredibly chaotic, filled with powerful guardians and constant threats, how did that ultimately shape Henry's long rule?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Did that early reliance on others, which was totally necessary at the time, maybe hinder his development as a truly strong, decisive king later on?
Could it have contributed to the later periods of unrest that definitely marked his reign? It's possible.
Definitely something to think about. Well, thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive into such a fascinating and often forgotten period of history.
My pleasure. It's an incredible story.
What about you listening? What was the most surprising thing you learned today, or what moment really stood out to you? Let us know.
Yeah, share your thoughts in the comments below.
And please don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive.